Dissect the State of the Nation address. I'm joined via Skype by Graham Hopwood, the Executive Director of the Institute for Public Policy Research. Good evening, Graham. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Yeah, good evening. Thanks for inviting me.
Right. Now, the President, Graham, touched on a host of issues. How was this address any different from the previous years?
I think overall it was more specific and to the point than previous sonas of the last few years, noticeably rhetoric. So I think the Namibia was only referred to towards the end of it. And on the whole, it reflects the need for the President to have a bit more focused in his speech as he approaches the last 2.5 to 3 years of his presidency. And I think it was a good summary of what government's been doing, and it was featured a number of new initiatives which put some positive spin on, what's not a great situation at the moment in the country. There were a few issues I think he didn't mention. I would like to have seen more on corruption. He did mention the new national strategy against corruption. Land reform in terms of agricultural land didn't really get a mention. I think some of the confusions around current investment policy weren't addressed, and also the implications of the closure of the Public Enterprise Ministry. But, it was a long speech and it had a lot of detail, and it did provide a good summary of government programs at the moment.
Speaking about government programs, well, as we heard earlier on, the President singled out youth unemployment as one of the major concerns, which is still a thorn in the flesh the nation's a thorn in the nation's flesh rather. Now, the President also announced the launch of a green concessional loan facility targeting youth entrepreneurs. What needs to happen to ensure this facility brings about the positive impact hoped for in terms of youth employment and profitability?
Yes, individually, some of these schemes might not have a huge impact. He did announce a number of other initiatives, including Development Bank of Namibia SME loans that will target the young, and of course the NSFAF amnesty that was mentioned in the headlines. So there were a number of initiatives targeting the youth, and all of these are welcome. But I think that we probably need a comprehensive response to youth unemployment that is more than a few individual initiatives. But the key, obviously, to youth solving youth unemployment and to achieving youth empowerment is to be able to create jobs. And at the moment, we're struggling to do that. And I think government's not alone in that responsibility. It needs to find effective ways of working with the private sector and bringing in investment in order to really bring in create opportunities for the youth, although all these schemes are welcome.
Now, Graham, we've also seen that government's internship policy has been revised with 2% of the positions in the public service reserved for interns. Is 2% sufficient?
I question this a little bit because the problem is, you've seen the Minister of Finance mention we have a problem with the size of our civil service and the wage bill. So having interns in the public service, it will provide them with important experience. But I just wonder if there are job opportunities at the end of that, particularly as we have to focus on reducing the size of the civil service, maybe not immediately due to the state of the economy, but over time. So it might be better to actually work on incentives to create internship opportunities in the private sector rather than focusing in such a large way on internships in the civil service.
Speaking of the economy, and lastly, before we let you go, Graham, with many good developments that have been announced, one cannot actually turn a blind eye on the high living cost as a result of Russia and Ukraine tension. So how do you think government can actually cushion these hardships even on the working population now feeling the pinch?
Yes, obviously that's the current situation, and many people are hurting because of rising living costs, the fuel costs, and rising inflation. And I think it does requires some policy interventions now, but I think the problem for government is they're in a very tight fiscal situation, and really there isn't much money and there isn't much room to manoeuvre. Possibly government could think about removing or suspending some of the levies on the fuel price, because they do add to the cost. I don't know if it's possible to suspend, for example, the RFA levy or the MVA levy or the NAMCO levy that all add to the overall price. That's one thing that could be considered. And then more generally, just to think about the welfare system, and the President, the announcement about the child disability grant being increased fivefold is, of course, very welcome, although it won't take effect till next year. So I don't know if there's anything can be done to tweak the systems in the meantime to just assist people. But definitely people are, you can hear it all the time on social media and everywhere, people are suffering at the moment, and some assistance to them, particularly those who are using taxis and so on and are now facing huge increases, would be great if the government can find a way within its fiscal situation to do that.
Right. Graham Hopwood, Executive Director for Institute for Public Policy Research, we thank you so much for your time and information this evening.
Thanks. Great. Thanks a lot.
All right.